And then there's also this whole theme of that Penguin is very, very loyal. There's this very clear distinction between who is on Penguin's team and the rest of the world, right? And Penguin treats people on either side of that divide very differently. And that, I think, that drives the entire episode and how he interacts with everybody. That I thought was really interesting and actually really believable. So in a lot of fiction, organized crime is portrayed as just being brutal and cruel and greedy and awful just for the sake of it, when actually it often is it behaves like an extended family, right? Where anybody who is on the inside gets treated with a kind of respect and compassion, and everybody else is the enemy, right? That kind of thing. And that was very clearly on display in this, especially in Penguin's organization, right? And that's how he treats Vic as well. That is in real contrast to the more business-like crime families who he works for, right? So I think this whole idea of family, both literal and practical, I think was really strong in this episode. Every time Penguin interacted with people he has power over, right? So the people in his organization or with Vic, there was a method to his violence and to the way he behaved. And it wasn't simply he's a bad guy, right? There's a theory behind what he's doing and why, and who he is kind to and who he is cruel to. And I think, like, when he's disposed of the body and he's gone home for a change of clothes and then he goes into his organization, and within 2 minutes, somebody comes to him and, hey, one of your guys has been ambushed and they took his product. And he does not punish the henchman. He cares for him. He says, make sure he gets medical attention. And he is interested in hearing what happened and make sure that somebody avenges this guy because he's one of ours. And if you're one of us, we go after you. And all his henchmen knew what the game was, right? Like, none of them were like cartoonish mustache twirling. And nobody twirled a mustache in the scene, right? Within this 2 or 3 minutes, we get a very interesting view into how Cobblepot runs things, right? And it's not a family exactly, but it's like, if you're on his team, he will look out for you and he will expect the same from you, right? And then in the next scene, he gets called to the Falcones and he is essentially called into the boardroom and some executive tells him he's fired because his services are no longer needed. And it's a completely different dynamic, right? It's no longer a family to any extent that Cobblepot's operation was. This is now a business. And like in any business, you will get paid for your services. And then when you're no longer needed, you're out on the street, right? And nobody cares about you after that. So like this whole sequence of showing the different ways the different organizations are run and how they're an expression of who the bosses are. Like he doesn't even talk to the boss, right? When he gets fired, he has to deal with 2 middlemen, right? So that entire story, it wasn't one scene exactly, but it was that sequence that showed how does Cobblepot view the world and how does he treat other people and how does he run things and why. Like that was the part where I said, okay, now we're doing something interesting.
I think to add to that as well, because again, in that you're like seeing loads of different versions of him in that. But for me, it was like the scene when he goes back home to his mom, and obviously he's like yeah, it was like kind of like in that moment where he's kind of like realized he's like in a bad situation. He's like a little bit panicked. It's kind of like bringing out some of like his like lesser qualities in terms of like his like lower confidence, insecurities, and this and the other. And it's kind of like framed around like his mom, who's like off her meds or whatever like that. And at first you think she's a little bit crazy in that, or she's a little bit like kind of like cuckoo or like in the head. But then you can kind of like slowly see that she's the one that helps instill the sort of kind of like confidence in him. Obviously, like she's like a little bit like tough with it as well in terms of like tough love. She kind of calls him like pussy boy or whatever like that. And she said, I didn't raise no pussy boy or whatever. And she kind of like helps him sort of kind of like find himself again and find like he's just like inner confidence to kind of then like follow through with his plan that he had like kind of like cooked up essentially from there. But I feel like that was just like in terms of like it being sort of a bit more of a deeper dive on his character. I feel like kind of what you mentioned there in terms of like how you're seeing loads of different versions of the same character depending on like who he's talking to, who he's interacting with. You're seeing like his confidence levels go up and down. You're seeing like his insecurities like kind of like go up and down and stuff like that. And I just feel like they just executed that brilliantly throughout the show. He's like not one note at all. Like there's just like so many different facets to his character depending on like,
but they all make sense, right? There you can see how they follow kind of the same basic principles, just applied to different situations. Because Penguin's rule is, if you're on his team, he cares for you, right? And that applies to Vic, that applies to his mother, that applies to people in this organization. And he wants the Falcones to treat him this way, and he's frustrated with the fact that they don't, right? But like none of like these are not disconnected. These are all part like expressions of the same personality trait.